You prepare for the worst and be pleasantly surprised by the best. But if you haven't prepared...
For years, Sue Aikens taught herself a hard lesson. Always brace for the worst, and if the best happens, treat it like a pleasant surprise. But what happens when you aren't prepared at all? That's the question Sue faced, and the answer nearly cost her everything. For more than a decade, Sue carried a secret she never intended to share. Known to the world as the fearless woman of the Arctic, the face of life below zero, she managed to hide what was really happening behind the scenes. But now the truth has surfaced. After countless deflections and attempts to keep cameras at bay, Sue has finally confirmed what insiders whispered about for years, a personal battle that reaches back to a traumatic chapter of her life, a chapter that almost ended her time at Kavik River Camp entirely. In April 2025, Sue broke her silence. She revealed not just the physical scars from her near-fatal 2015 accident, but the unseen wounds, mental, emotional, that nearly pushed her into walking away from the wilderness she called home for over 40 years. In her own words, "I thought I could survive anything. But there were days when I wasn't sure if I even wanted to." The incident that changed everything happened during brutal weather. Sue had been called to make a high-risk snowmobile run over unstable terrain. It went wrong fast. She shattered her collarbone, dislocated a hip, and tore soft tissue throughout her body. And though the doctors urged evacuation, Sue refused. In her mind, Kavik couldn't function without her. So she stayed, operating the camp alone, her mobility severely restricted, while struggling to manage even basic daily survival tasks. By 2020, after years of pushing through the pain, Sue finally accepted medical intervention. Specialists in Anchorage told her bluntly, without surgery, she'd face permanent osteoarthritis in less than 3 years. Reluctantly, she paused filming and traveled to Washington State for extensive reconstructive procedures in late 2021. She kept the entire process quiet, not wanting viewers or anyone to see her vulnerable. During those months away from the camera, Sue found herself trapped inside a body that no longer cooperated. As she later admitted in a private conversation, "I didn't want anyone to see me broken. I'm not invincible, but I've never been the type to call for help when I'm down." Her mental health spiraled. Insomnia, relentless anxiety, and dark thoughts crept in. Doctors prescribed mild antipsychotic medications to help stabilize her. At one point, Sue even considered giving up Kavik entirely. She described standing in the heart of the camp, looking at the main fuel line and contemplating shutting everything down forever. She later said, "Maybe I needed Kavik more than Kavik needed me." That chilling thought was quoted internally by researchers studying the psychological toll of long-term isolation in extreme environments. But despite everything, Sue fought back. By mid-2022, after medical clearance and months of rehabilitation, she returned to Kavik. However, something had changed. For the first time, Sue began planning for a future without herself at the center of it. She quietly drafted plans to build a secondary cabin 110 miles south of the camp, a contingency, a possible exit path. But recovery wasn't just physical. Sue knew she had to rethink how she lived. From July 2022 onward, Kavik transformed. She redesigned her entire living setup to ease strain on her recovering body. Systems that once required constant manual labor were replaced or automated. Climate monitors, snow pressure sensors, and semi-passive water storage units were installed. Heating switched from fuel burning to a more efficient indirect heat storage system, all to minimize the operations she needed to perform daily. Her daily life became scheduled around her health, synced to her circadian rhythms and local climate patterns. Gentle exercises, breathing routines, and psychological monitoring became part of her week, not just survival tasks. Sue wasn't just living in the Arctic anymore, she was adapting to it in a way she never had before. Privately, she audited her own psychological responses, identifying reflexive behaviors created by decades of solitude. From this, she developed her own system to manage mood fluctuations, not as therapy but as survival. Isolation wasn't something she endured anymore. It was something she controlled. By early 2024, Sue had formalized regular medical checkups with local health organizations. From her outpost at Kavik, she monitored critical indicators like muscle health, nervous system responses, and blood oxygen levels, catching small problems before they became big ones. What all this reveals is simple yet profound. Sue Aikens has shifted from living reactively to surviving strategically. She no longer relies on brute strength and grit alone. Instead, she's redesigned her entire existence to fit her current limitations, turning survival into a calculated science. But Sue's story runs deeper than surgeries and technology. It stretches all the way back to her childhood. Born in suburban Illinois in 1963, Sue's life fractured when she was just 12. After her parents' divorce, her mother dragged her to a remote Alaskan village, then left her there. Abandoned and entirely on her own, Sue survived her adolescence in isolation, without guardians or support, learning to fend for herself in a harsh, unforgiving landscape. That experience shaped her permanently. In personal documents, she describes her life strategy as a preventive survival standard, a mindset built to avoid dependence at all costs. For years, she wandered across Alaska's coldest outposts before establishing Kavik in 2002, where she lived alone for nearly 2 decades. Researchers analyzing Sue's behavioral patterns concluded that her extreme independence isn't just a choice, it's a survival response formed in childhood. She built her life around isolation, and as a result, reintegrating into society now feels impossible to her. In her own words, Sue identifies Kavik as more than a home. It's an extension of her nervous system, the structure that holds her together mentally and emotionally. Limiting outside contact isn't a preference. It's necessary to her mental stability. In late 2024, in a report to the Arctic Registry, Sue wrote one of her most haunting admissions. "I am the end product of a chain of social ruptures, and I choose to operate as such." For the first time, she acknowledged that her life of solitude wasn't accidental, it was inevitable. And yet, through all the pain, the injury, and the crushing loneliness, Sue Aikens is still there. Still fighting,